He hit me for years, then asked for tickets to the final. My name is Daniel Cole, and the first thing I remember learning about my own body was which parts of it bruised in a way that could be hidden under a school uniform and which parts could not. A piece of knowledge no 7-year-old should ever be forced to catalog, and yet I cataloged it with the grim, methodical precision of a much older person, because my survival in that house depended on it. My father, Victor Cole, was a big man, broad through the shoulders from years of loading crates at the shipping yard, and he carried his failures the way other men carry a wallet, always close, always heavy, always ready to be produced and spent on whoever happened to be standing nearest when the pressure in him finally broke. That person, more often than not, was me. I remember the particular sound his belt made sliding free of its loops, a soft, hissing rasp of leather against denim that even now, 16 years later, can make my hands go cold and clammy in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, a sound that lived in my nervous system long after it stopped living in that cramped, water-stained apartment above a shuttered pawn shop on the edge of town. We were poor in the specific, grinding way that leaves its residue on everything, on the thin walls that let in the neighbors' arguments as easily as our own leaked out, on the refrigerator that hummed too loudly and cooled too little, on the single pair of cleats my mother bought me secondhand from a church donation bin, one size too large, stuffed with newspaper at the toes so I would not trip over my own feet on the gravel pitch behind the housing block where I first fell in love with football. That gravel pitch, ringed by chain link fencing rusted through in a dozen places, became the only geography in my childhood where I felt something other than fear, because on that gravel, with a ball at my feet, I was not the boy who flinched at the sound of a door slamming. I was simply fast and clever, and free in a way my own house never once allowed me to be. I remember the specific weightlessness of a well-struck shot, the ball leaving my foot with a sound like a held breath finally released, and I remember thinking, even at 8 years old, crouched in the settling dust of that pitch, that if I could only run fast enough, far enough, I might someday outrun the house I went home to every evening. I have tried, many times, to describe to people who did not grow up the way I did the particular, low-grade vigilance that lives permanently in the body of a child raised under threat, and I have never found language adequate to the task, though I will try again here, because I think it matters to understanding everything that came afterward. It was not simply fear in the ordinary sense, a sudden spike of adrenaline when danger appeared, because danger in that house did not announce itself, it simply existed, always, as a kind of ambient pressure in the air, the way humidity sits heavy before a storm even on a day when the sky remains stubbornly blue. I learned to read the specific weight of my father's footsteps on the stairs, to distinguish the ordinary, tired tread of a man returning from a long shift at the yard from the heavier, more deliberate tread that meant something had gone wrong inside him that day, some unnamed frustration that would need somewhere to land before the night was through. I learned to keep my voice pitched low at the dinner table, to answer questions with as few words as possible, to make myself, in every visible way, a smaller and less noticeable object in a room that had already claimed far more of me than any child should ever be asked to surrender. My mother, Elena, loved me with a desperate, cornered kind of love, the love of a woman who had married young and poor and found herself, by the time she understood the shape of the man she had married, already trapped by circumstances larger and colder than her own courage could dismantle alone. She would press cold, damp cloths against the welts on my back late at night, her hands trembling, whispering apologies that were not truly hers to give, promising in a voice worn thin with exhaustion that things would be different soon, a soon that never quite arrived on schedule, a soon that stretched itself, year after year, into a horizon that kept receding the moment I reached for it. I do not blame her, not anymore, not since I grew old enough to understand the particular, suffocating architecture of fear that traps a person inside a marriage with no money, no family nearby, and a husband whose temper could turn a Tuesday evening into a night that ended in the emergency room with a story about falling down the stairs. But I will not pretend that understanding erased the loneliness of those years, the specific hollow ache of being a child who loved his mother fiercely and still, some nights, wished with his whole chest that she would simply take him and run. The man who changed the direction of my life was a retired scout named Thomas Bracewell, a stooped, silver-haired figure who used to stand at the edge of that gravel pitch on Saturday mornings with a thermos of tea and a notebook, watching neighborhood matches with the patient, unhurried attention of a man who had spent 40 years learning to see talent before it knew its own name. I was 11 the first time he approached my mother after a match, his voice gentle in a way that made me instinctively suspicious, because gentleness from adults had rarely, in my experience, come without a hidden cost, and he told her, without any of the salesman's polish I would later learn to expect from men in his profession, that he had watched a great many boys play on pitches worse than this one, and that he had rarely seen a boy move the way I moved, reading the game 2 steps ahead of where his feet currently stood. He offered a trial at a youth academy 40 minutes away by train, fees waived, boots provided, and I remember standing beside my mother in the fading afternoon light, my heart hammering so hard against my ribs that I was certain he could see it moving beneath my shirt, understanding, with a child's sudden and total clarity, that I was being offered a door out of a house that had never once felt like home. My father did not want me to go. I want to be precise about the particular cruelty of his reasoning, because it still, even now, sits in my chest like a stone I have never fully managed to dissolve. He did not object because he doubted my talent, and he did not object out of any protective instinct for my safety on unfamiliar trains and unfamiliar streets. He objected because a boy who spent his afternoons at a football academy was a boy who could not be sent to stand at the shipping yard gates on weekends, hoping for a few hours of casual labor that my father collected the wages for himself, and because a son who found something to be proud of outside these 4 walls was a son whose fear of him might, eventually, begin to thin. I remember the night before my first trial, the specific, bruising grip of his hand around my upper arm as he told me, in a voice gone low and dangerous in a way I had learned to fear more than shouting, that football was a waste of a poor boy's time, that men like Bracewell used boys like me and discarded us the moment we stopped being useful, and that I would embarrass myself and this family in front of strangers who would laugh at my second-hand boots. I said nothing. I had learned, long before that night, that silence was the only language in that house that did not invite further violence, and I lay awake until dawn with my arm throbbing beneath the sheet, replaying every cruel word until I had memorized them the way other children memorized multiplication tables, filing them away in a part of myself I did not yet understand I was building specifically to survive him. I made the academy. My mother sold a gold bracelet, the only piece of jewelry she owned that had not already been pawned during some earlier crisis, to cover the cost of a proper pair of boots that fit my feet without newspaper stuffed into the toes, and she told my father, in the only act of open defiance I ever witnessed her commit in 18 years of marriage, that I was going, and that if he wanted to stop her, he would have to do it in front of the neighbors, because she intended to walk me to that train. Station herself every single Saturday whether he liked it or not. He did not hit her that night, though I could see, in the tight, controlled set of his jaw, exactly how close he came, and I understood, watching that particular restraint, that some fragile, cornered part of my mother had finally found a boundary she was willing to bleed for, even if it was not, could never quite be, her own. The train journey itself, those first few Saturdays, became its own small ritual of healing, though I would not have used a word so gentle at the time. I remember the specific rattle of the carriage over a particular joint in the tracks about 12 minutes into the ride, a rhythmic shudder that somehow settled my nerves rather than unsettling them, and I remember watching the gray, cramped streets of our own neighborhood give way, mile by mile, to wider roads and cleaner storefronts and eventually to the academy's actual training pitches, real grass rather than gravel, lined in crisp white paint that seemed, to an 11-year-old who had only ever played on rutted dirt, almost impossibly luxurious. My mother would sit in the small visitors area with her hands folded in her lap, watching through a chain-link fence far newer and far less rusted than the one back home, and I remember glancing over at her sometimes mid-drill and catching an expression on her face I had rarely seen there before, something that took me years to correctly identify as unguarded hope, a fragile, tentative thing she seemed almost afraid to let fully surface in case the world noticed, and took it from her too. The years at the academy were not a fairy tale, because nothing in my life has ever arrived without its accompanying cost. I trained on an empty stomach more often than I ever admitted to my coaches, ashamed of the particular hunger that made my legs feel hollow during the final 15 minutes of every session, a shame that felt absurdly heavier than the hunger itself. I went home each evening to a house where the atmosphere had curdled further, where my growing skill on the pitch seemed only to sharpen my father's resentment rather than soften it, where a good result in a youth match might earn me not praise but a fresh, cold silence that I had learned to fear more than his shouting, because silence in that house was always the pressure building before the next storm. I was 15 the last time he raised his hand to me, and I remember it with a clarity that time has not dulled even slightly, because it was also the last time I let myself be small in front of him. He had been drinking, and the trigger, as it so often was, amounted to nothing at all. A plate left in the sink, a word spoken in a tone he decided was disrespectful, and as his hand came up I felt something in me that had been coiling tighter and tighter for 8 years finally reach its absolute limit, and instead of flinching, instead of curling into the familiar, practice posture of a boy protecting his ribs, I caught his wrist in mid-air with a grip made strong by 3 years of academy conditioning, and I held it there, my own heart slamming against my chest so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I told him, in a voice that shook but did not break, that he would never touch me again, that I had grown taller than him now, and stronger, and that the next time his hand came anywhere near me I would use every ounce of that strength without a single moment of hesitation. He never touched me again. He also, from that night forward, barely spoke to me at all, as though the loss of his power over my body had emptied out whatever thin substance had passed, in that house, for a relationship between a father and his son. I signed my first professional contract at 19 with a mid-table club 2 hours from the town I grew up in, for a wage that felt, after years of second-hand boots and empty stomachs, like an amount too large to be entirely real, and I remember sitting alone in the small rented flat I moved into that same week, staring at the signed papers on the kitchen table, feeling an emotion so complicated it took me nearly an hour to correctly name it as grief rather than joy, grief for the boy on the gravel pitch who had needed this exact rescue 8 years earlier and had received it only in pieces, too late to undo the damage already lodged permanently in his body. My mother left my father the year I turned 20, using the money I quietly, insistently wired to her every month to finally secure a small apartment of her own, a modest, sunlit space with a refrigerator that hummed quietly and cooled everything perfectly, and I remember visiting her there for the first time, standing in her kitchen, watching her make tea with hands that had, for the first time in my memory, stopped their permanent, low-grade tremor, and understanding that this quiet, unremarkable domestic scene was, in its own way, the single greatest victory either of us had ever achieved. My career accelerated faster than even Bracewell, who remained a steady, paternal presence in my life long after his scouting duties officially ended, had predicted, and by 23 I was playing regularly for the national team, my face appearing on billboards in the very town where I had once collected casual labor wages my father pocketed for himself. I do not say this to boast, because the fame itself brought me less peace than people assume it should, but I say it because it matters to the shape of what happened next. Because visibility, it turns out, works both ways, drawing toward you not only admiration but also, eventually, the very people who once discarded you, now recalculating, with the same cold arithmetic Marcus Whitfield once applied to a failing bookshop, what value might still be extracted from a relationship they had long ago abandoned. Those early years of visible success carried their own particular weight that I had not anticipated, a strange, disorienting vertigo that would sometimes hit me in the middle of an otherwise ordinary evening, standing in the kitchen of an apartment far nicer than any I had grown up in, staring at my own reflection in a darkened window and feeling, for just a moment, the ghost of that 11-year-old boy in second-hand boots looking back at me with an expression I could only describe as disbelief. I underwent, during those years, a great deal of quiet, unglamorous work that no highlight reel ever captured, sessions with a sports psychologist named Dr. Renata Alsop who taught me to recognize the specific bodily signals that meant my nervous system had slipped back into the old vigilance of childhood, a tightening in the jaw, a held breath, a sudden urge to make myself smaller in a room, and to gently, deliberately, remind that frightened, coiled part of myself that the danger remembered was no longer present in the room I currently occupied. It was slow, unglamorous work, closer in spirit to physical therapy than to any dramatic breakthrough, but it was work that mattered every bit as much as the training sessions on the pitch, because a body that has spent a childhood braced for violence does not simply relax the moment the violence stops. It has to be taught, patiently and repeatedly, that safety is now the default state rather than a rare and temporary exception. He found me again 3 days before the biggest match of my career, a cup final broadcast to an audience of many millions, and he did not call me directly, because he had lost that number years earlier along with every other claim to my life, but he called my mother instead, her voice tight with a discomfort she could not quite hide when she recounted it to me later, telling me his voice had sounded warm and easy in a way that made her skin crawl, asking whether she thought I might be able to arrange tickets for himself and a friend from the shipping yard, framing the request as though 8 years of silence and 18 years of violence before that were simply a minor administrative gap that a phone call could smooth over. I remember the specific cold clarity that settled over me when my mother relayed the message. A stillness entirely different from the frightened stillness of my childhood. A stillness that belonged entirely to the man I had become rather than the boy I had been, and I understood, in that moment, with the same precision I once used to catalog which bruises could be hidden under a school uniform, exactly what I wanted to do with the opportunity he had, in his arrogance, handed directly to me. My hands, I noticed, did not shake as I listened, a small, private fact I registered with something close to wonder, because for so many years the mere mention of his name had been enough to send a cold current racing down my arms, and now, apparently, that particular current had finally run itself dry. I did not refuse him outright, and I did not shout, and I did not give my mother a message full of the fury still burning somewhere low in my chest, because I had learned, across 8 years of training, that the coldest, most effective response is rarely the loudest one. Instead, I arranged for 2 tickets to be left at the will call window under his name, seats in the general stand rather than anywhere near the players' families, and I told my mother to inform him, in whatever words she chose, that the tickets came with no further contact expected or wanted, that this single gesture closed the account permanently rather than opening it. I played the match of my life that night, scoring the goal that decided the final in the 89th minute, a low, driven shot that left my foot with that same sound like a held breath finally released that I first discovered on a gravel pitch behind a housing block. And as the stadium erupted around me, I did not search the crowd for my father's face, because I already understood, with total certainty, that whatever validation I might have once craved from that particular man had long since stopped being a thing I needed in order to feel whole. The true revenge, if that word even fits what I ultimately chose to do, arrived not in that stadium but 3 months later, when I used a portion of my cup final bonus to fund a shelter for women and children fleeing domestic violence in the same town where I grew up, naming it, deliberately and publicly, after the street where our old apartment above the pawn shop had stood, so that every person who read a plaque or a news article about its opening would understand exactly what kind of house had produced the money now protecting other families from the same fate. I gave a single interview about the shelter's opening, and in it I spoke plainly, without theatrics, about the belt sliding free of its loops, about the cold cloths my mother pressed against my back, about the 11-year-old boy who was told that football was a waste of a poor boy's time by a father who feared, above all else, losing his grip on a son who might someday grow strong enough to stop him. I did not mention my father by name, because I understood, by then, that his identity mattered far less to the story than the shape of what he had done, and that the true justice available to me was never going to be public humiliation, it was going to be the shelter itself, standing solid and lit and staffed on a street that had once meant nothing but fear to a boy in second-hand boots. I have thought a great deal in the years since about what it means to call any of this a victory, because victory suggests an ending, a clean line drawn beneath a struggle, and my life has never offered me anything quite so tidy. There are still nights, rarer now than they once were but never entirely absent, when I wake abruptly from a dream I cannot fully recall, my heart hammering, my hand instinctively pressed flat against my own ribs as though checking, even now, for damage that has not been inflicted in over a decade. On those nights I have learned, through years of the patient, unglamorous work Dr. Alsop first taught me, to sit up slowly, to feel the solid, unremarkable furniture of my own bedroom around me, to remind the frightened, coiled part of myself that still lives somewhere beneath my ribs that the house it remembers no longer exists, that the man who filled it with fear no longer has any claim over the body I have spent so many years rebuilding into something strong enough to finally protect. Self. I am 26 years old now, and I still play, though these days I think less about outrunning my childhood than about what I might build on top of the ground I have already cleared. My mother visits the training facility most weekends, and Bracewell, well into his 80s now, still shows up to watch from the stands with the same thermos of tea, though these days he brings his notebook out of habit rather than necessity. I have not spoken to my father since the night the tickets were collected at the will call window, and I do not imagine I ever will again, not out of lingering anger, though the anger has never entirely disappeared, but because I finally understand something it took me nearly 2 decades to learn on that gravel pitch and in that cold apartment and on every professional field since, which is that the most complete revenge available to a person who has survived what I survived is not cruelty returned in kind. It is simply a life built so solidly, so deliberately, and so far beyond his reach, that the man who once tried to convince an 11-year-old boy he was worthless is forced to watch, from the cheap seats, exactly how wrong he was.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like this, please like and subscribe. Your support means everything and helps me create more of these dramas. See you in the next story.